All right, we're going to get going. Take one. Hello, this is Jim Schaefer, the host and the executive producer of Rip Rap, the academic book television program. I'm delighted to have a colleague of mine here, Randall Baier, for another one of our fast-paced discussions. I'm going to do that over. Okay. Take two.
Can I say glad to be with you? Or do you want to wait?
Yeah, I just noticed something else. We got this tape so that my eyes are going to be going all the way down there. I don't know how we're going to do it. Okay. Take two. Hello, this is Jim Schaefer, the host and executive producer of Rip Rap, the academic book television program. I'm delighted to have a colleague here, Randall Baier, for another one of our discussions on some of the books we would have loved to do programs on during the past year but couldn't for various reasons. This discussion is well within the tradition of L'Apostrophe, the wonderful program in Paris that we regard as our intellectual precedent. Thank you for joining me once again, Randall.
Great to be here. Every 6 months I always find a new crop that you've picked for us, so it's always fun.
As we videotape this interview, we're only 2 days away from the presidential elections in 2004 in the United States, which are featuring a really heated confrontation between President George W. Bush and U.S. Senator John Kerry. Now, I don't really want to get into a heated discussion about the pluses and minuses of their platform, but I thought it might be, we've got a group of 4 books here that touch on some of the issues that have been emerging underneath this presidential thing. And the first thing we'll start with is the Antinomies of Modernity by, Vasant Kawar and Sucheta Mazumdar.
Yeah, I think the title is perfectly matched with the times, Jim. The Antinomy of Modernity. So, essays on race, orient, and nation. And from what I've gleaned from the book, it goes into the sort of opposite mix of culture, gender, race, and I guess you would call them hot topics of the day in a certain way.
Well, certainly right now, race has been central both in scholarship and in the presidential discussions because of the war in Iraq and the Middle East, and what does that mean, and how are we dealing with that? And then in talking with people, they become quite conscious of who is the other, and that's become quite
especially
concerned.
When the war is, in your home again. The image from Vietnam was, the war in your living room. And it's exactly the same, maybe not quite as powerful because it's being, sort of controlled a little bit by what we actually see. But certainly there's life in Baghdad looks very much like life in many modern cities across the world, and to sort of project that makes you really think about the issues in this book.
Another book that we've got here is Transparency and Conspiracy, Ethnographies of Suspicion in the New World Order. And if that isn't an issue these days, where we've got people saying, well, all the institutions and nation states ought to be transparent in how they conduct their affairs, and yet underneath it, people are thinking, well, there's a conspiracy there, and this is even becoming wending its way into mythologies and cosmologies about, a real concern about, well, what is going on?
Right. Yeah. It's interesting that ethnography is the key here. I'm curious to see how the editors, Harry West and Todd Sanders, pulled various scholars together to look at that.
Well, and this is where scholarship can really help, because there's a lot been written in the news media about what's going on in terms of nation states and national institutions. But when the scholarship really takes a careful look, to get an informed idea of what's going on. And they talk about the New World Order, which is a sore topic for some people. But still, I think it's wonderful that we've got this kind of scholarship, and we did want to deal with that.
The key word here is transparency, which it says in the back has become a watchword for good government, but other people would find it a little bit different.
Well, and it also deals with international policies of the United States and how it relates to other countries. And like I said, these are not marginal matters. These are serious things, and I would like to have serious readers in the wider culture do more reading to become more informed about what really is going on, rather than just deriving it from from news media and from just casual conversations. because there are some people that argue that one of the main reasons that we're in war in Iraq has more to do with Iraq's huge resources of oil than anything to do with, you know, weapons of mass destruction that we found out don't exist, or Saddam Hussein, who's now under arrest. This other book here is kind of also dealing with race, nature, and the politics of difference, and that's with Donald Moore and now maybe you can...
I'll read the authors for you while we're going through. Donald S. Moore, Jake Kosek, and Anand Pandian, editors again. Race, Nature, and the Politics of Difference. Another theme close to the others. You've put these in 4 groups for us, I see. So
yeah. Well, this one also, I really wanted people to start thinking about the politics of difference, because it can cut both ways. And so these authors are very careful in terms of, well, Donald Moore is an assistant professor of anthropology at the University of California, Berkeley, and Jake Kosek is a geographer at Stanford, and Anand Pandian is a doctoral candidate in anthropology at the University of California, Berkeley. So I thought this is the kind of work that we really need. And, you know, and there's that old argument that race really doesn't serve well when you're talking about ethnicity, but it's something that we use in this country and has existed.
Right.
But the notion about ethos, you know, or ethnos, I should say, as far as giving more precision to understanding origins and what is the specific configuration of a culture, is something that we can never do enough of that. And so I think this is the kind of book that I wanted to see more prominently displayed. And of course, this other book,
a guidebook to modern times.
Well, it's Kenneth Van W. Dam's The Rules of the Global Game, a new look at U.S. international economic policy making. And by gosh, if that doesn't open up some stuff in terms of what are we doing and why are we doing it. The United States is the last remaining superpower, and so what it decides in terms of what it's going to do has enormous impacts on you know, our involvement with the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank.
Right. Well, it certainly comes with a weighty pedigree from the University of Chicago and reviews from Foreign Affairs and so forth. Just briefly, this will it's claiming to be a comprehensive examination to help non-economists, certainly such as I, make sense of the forces that shape U.S. international economic policies. Maybe it can really help us out. But you know, on a very practical level, this is the kind of insight that we need to really understand how the money economies work of the world, which I clearly really don't have a full grasp of.
Well, and I think people could argue that there may not be as clear rules as what, you know, there's the stated rules and then there's informal rules. And when you're a country like the United States that has so much power, sometimes the implicit connotations of what you're doing come to, and I think that's what he's pointing at. We need to be much more clearly defined about what we're doing.
Right.
The country is obviously a capitalist country. Well, there's some side issues that happens when we get involved with countries who are not capitalist or who are not successful or who are underdeveloped.
Right, and work on totally different ideas of economy and economic development.
And so then you get into this thing of our work through the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank and negotiating the deals out of how you're going to help countries has an enormous impact on that country. Right. The next section is kind of fascinating because you get into the issue of, for example, Deng Xiao's book, The Power of Tiananmen, State-Society Relations in the 1989 Beijing Student Movement. This is still a really sore point with me. I mean, I had forgotten that it involved 100,000 students.
I had too, until you pointed it out to me in your notes
that
here.
was the largest such demonstration in human history.
We're so taken by the single tank versus one student, that moment of, you know, which is kind of the
we should explain that a little bit, because not everyone remembers that.
That's true. We've gone a generation now.
What there was a demonstration in Tiananmen Square in Beijing. And the students were trying to protest what was going on, And at one point, the tanks were coming in, and one student stood in front of the tank and stopped it. But that was before a far more tragic moment later, when the national rulers decided that they were just going to run over, they're going to reassert their power, take over the square, and they literally ran over people who were camping.
They were in the way. They got crushed. They literally crushed. It was a particular, and oddly enough, or maybe not oddly enough, but it was an international media event, which became, I think in a certain way, I remember something, almost the shock of Ted Koppel's face, because, you know, it was live with Ted Koppel. He was there too. But I think they were so totally shocked at the fact that in the face of media, the regime would still persist, and did, and essentially got away with it. So. And
a lot of those people went into prison. It was horrible, horrific consequences, but it's just something, one of those memories that when the tanks were just running over people who were camping out, and who were in blankets and sleeping bags, and they had successfully made it a global issue, where by doing faxes and these news releases and the constant awareness with the news media.
That was the age of the fax revolutions. The Soviet, the Berlin, the Soviet Union.
It brings up this thing, though, that when you feel the state is acting erroneously or not in the best interest of the people of that area, what do you do?
Right.
And so I'll put this book up there.
Right.
We'll add that to our stack. And then this next one, Contentious Lives. I found this, it's also a protest kind of a book. It's Javier Araujo's book, Contentious Lives, Two Argentine Women, Two Protests, and the Quest for Recognition. Well, what do you do if you feel that something is not right and needs to be corrected? And how are these then also experienced, and then how are they remembered? Because that's, you're shaping the national imaginary.
That's right. It's intriguing. First of all, I wanted to just point out the cover, just the very clever design of the negative and the positive sort of image juxtaposed here, just to sort of say the hidden and the exposed. But just this week, I read an article by a theater teacher at Cal Arts, and she was talking about how she teaches the theater of witness and suffering and magical realism. She's a Latin American specialist, and she has a class on Argentine testimony and reconciliation, and how through the literary genre of magical realism, stories that are unable to be stated for fear of your own, for fear of being rounded up by the police, or your, death, taken away, being disappeared, how those stories can be sort of put through theater and through magical realistic genres of theater.
When you become aware that
this book comes out now, so yeah.
And what happens in that, like I said, the national imaginary has a very potent impact on the people who live there, and that leads us to 3 more books that deal with famous places of imagining and what happens as our complex versions of our social structures, history, and experiences. And one of them that you're looking at now is the Chicana Feminisms, edited by Gabriela F.
Arredondo, yep.
Ida Hurtado, Norma Klein, Olga Najero Ramirez, and Patricia Zavala. And, I've not seen this kind of book. I mean, there's more awareness now of feminism, there's more awareness of Hispanic tradition and so forth. But this book really starts looking at things from a Chicana feminism standpoint. And I found that really rich, kind of area of scholarship.
I know within the study of ethnomusicology, there's a great deal being written on, for instance, Selena, the Tejano singer, and other Chicana, from a feminist point of view, but Chicana singers, and it's becoming also, there's, as you've got another book on Asian Americans coming up, Asian American Critique, feminisms of various points of view within, or in fact not necessarily feminisms, but different voices from within, or maybe perhaps of the lesser voiced are now coming out with anthologies of this kind. So A Critical Reader, Chicana Feminisms is that one.
Well, and what I liked about this Chicana Feminisms, it's one thing to learn something about someone, it's something else to start understanding the structure of their thought. How did it evolve? Where does it come from? What are the origins? And that also then leads into this Imagine Otherwise with Candace Chua, which is a whole Asian American kind of thing. And there's some amazing stuff that I've seen coming out about Asian American.
Fabulous cover here. Yeah.
The whole of Asian American culture and what that's coming to mean.
Our next one, we'll have to also look at a new. There's a new book that has come out on Asian American music, being Asian American through music, through various voices of American music, but not just the Asian, but Asian American jazz performers, Asian American rock, rap, whatever.
Well, I heard an interview with a guy that's coming out as an Asian American hip-hop singer and rap. And it's so unusual, because I was talking with some African American students of mine, and they said, yeah, that he's regarded as kind of like Eminem, that he's not from the African American, but he says, I'm Chinese.
Yes.
So what are you going to do with it?
Right. Deal with it.
And he's his own person. He happens to just want to express himself in that hip hop, rap kind of motif.
Right. Before the program, we were talking about the concept of hybridity, and something of this nature, I think, talks about multiple identities living simultaneously within, in this case, a person or a group, but also a moment. That kind of an ethos can really be present. Imagine Otherwise.
Yes, and then this one, I thought, The Place of Enchantment, British occultism and the culture of the modern. This is actually a lot of fun, because you think that the British in the Victorian era really stayed, and they weren't. They had all kinds of stuff going on. And this, you're getting into the occult and sort of the magical and the spiritual and all this unusual stuff. It's by Alex Owen. And so I thought it was just a lot of fun. But it also parallels the other things, because it deals with the imaginary. And what's unusual about the book is you just don't expect that out of the British. You expect something more staid.
It reminds me of the, without having read the book, and it's obviously a very scholarly book, but the whole nature of Mr. Kite. So going back to the Beatles song, and his, his sort of fantastic show. Of course, he wasn't an occultist or aristocratic alchemist, but certainly there's that kind of fascination with.
Well, and the origins is that
the amazing Mr.
This
Kite
builds on the impact of Darwin and Freud and James Fraser. They had this. They wanted to have this very rational package to what the world's supposed to represent, and all this extraordinary stuff was coming in and unsettling them, and so they couldn't quite get it all packaged up.
Right. It's pretty hard to realize that not only are you an animal, but you're one of the species that are going through changes just like every other one.
Well, and huge things that didn't make any sense. Rationally, there was the irrational that wouldn't settle down. It wouldn't be good. It wouldn't take its turn. Another issue that's come out in the presidential campaign this year had to do with healthcare, and so I thought there's 3 important scholarly studies that show how illness and the way the state responds has always been of intense interest. And one of them is this in time of cholera. And this actually deals with a medical crisis in eastern Venezuela in 1992. And it's
recent.
Racial profiling during its time of cholera, racial profiling during a medical nightmare by Charles Briggs and Clara Martini Briggs.
It's scary. You can imagine it today. I mean, this is why this this book would be so important. It's not something from 1860, or when cholera was first mapped in London, for instance, to actually define where the disease was spreading and how it was spreading. I mean, it's modern day with modern day capabilities for treatment.
Well, and we're also in this thing where there's a shortage of flu vaccine, but going into this, and there's people really panicked by that right now.
Right.
But going into that, in August, the federal government's Centers for Disease Control are mumbling things about, well, we might have a pandemic. We might have a really awful attack of flu that would be as deadly as what it was in 1918. And then they come up with a flu shortage, and then you've got people waiting in line for 3 to 6 hours to get a flu shot, where last year you could have fired a cannon in any one of these clinics and you wouldn't have hit anybody because nobody was paying any attention.
That's right. Maybe it's a strategy to get everybody to go every year.
Well, no, I think that it is an awareness. Like the point you're making is that sometimes these things happen despite the medicine.
Right.
The factors, the viruses evolve and circumstances are such that you can have these awful outbreaks.
It makes me wonder, even the nature of profiling itself. We may think that we have created let's take the flu vaccine issue in America right now, today. There's a medical profiling that's going on. A certain age, if you have a certain medical condition, if diabetes, for instance, if you're younger than whatever, 55 or 65, and you are healthy, then you can't get but if you have diabetes, you can get it. But actually, we could think that that's medical, i.e. objective, but there may be other layers of this that we're not really reading. And certainly, it sounds from the title of the book that even something as seemingly objective as a medical profile was not part of this at all.
Well, and the flu vaccine thing was something where, we'll just stick it in there. Here we have so-called modern medicines. We have these huge corporations producing vaccines and medicines and all kinds of pharmaceutical products. But the trick of it is to actually keep up with things. And with the flu vaccine, and there's all these, in other words, time-specific events.
Subtleties to it. It has to be.
The flu vaccine is something that has to be reconfigured each year based on, it's a guess. Well, these are the kinds of flus, species that were strains.
These
that
immunities showed up this year and project what might be the immunities next year, because you've got to be 9 months ahead.
Guess wrong, we're all in a pile of trouble.
So moving on, there's one on
the big doctoring.
Big doctoring. Speaking of big doctoring, macro medicine, I guess. Big doctoring in America, profiles in primary care. Fitzhugh Mullen, MD, and talking about the critical importance of primary care physicians in our medical system in the United States.
And the whole idea of looking at doctors as unsung heroes, who can help the patients through, as it says in the book, gloomy economics and gruesome bureaucracy. And then, again, the people who really are passionately involved with the patients and want to help them sometimes are held back by all kinds of issues. These days, you've got all these millions of people who don't have health care. Well, there's a limit to how many times a doctor can help someone and not charge for it.
That's very true.
Or charge very low rates. It's not like the old days. Some of this care is very, very expensive, and the tests that are required are very, very expensive, just enormously.
Right.
And so now that all calls into the issue of having enough resources to deal with what you think a patient ought to have. So and these hospitals now are very large corporations that need to run their affairs. In fact, I think there's kind of a tendency to look at all their issues that way. Some of them are really struggling. Even though they take in a lot of money, they have a lot of costs.
Right.
This next one, I think it's kind of funny. I shouldn't say funny, but the whole notion of invalidism and identity in 19th century Britain, and that's kind of harks back to that.
To the book on the Victorian ideas of magic and
but
alchemy.
This is that thing about the invalid. you
Right.
know, and how incapacitated they would be. And if you were an invalid, then you were given a whole lot of
That's right.
you know, space. That was okay if you had a
Don't shake up Aunt Sarah; she'll swoon.
right, and then
or
she
whatever.
has to take to her, you know, to her, you know, room and be out of commission for 2 or 3 days because she's just been overwhelmed by it.
But now, is it? I didn't mean to sort of pick up on a kind of feminist theme here, but is there a focus on the woman as invalid? Given, I'm just picking up on the graphic. Is there a focus in the book on that?
Well, what I found always fascinating with cultures like the Victorian, there's always the exception. And certainly women use that, you know. I mean, in something, a rational construct, it would appear that everyone are functioning like machines, chunk, 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 chunk.
Right.
But it didn't work that way.
But there's
really.
some kind of a kind of an otherness here, or some kind of a response to.
But that's what I found fascinating.
The way society is
way to
working.
excuse yourself out of that chunk,
Right.
chunk, chunk thing. And that's why I fascinated me about the other book, you know, is that they tried to have this rational thing. It just didn't work. There were just too many holes that, you know, that it would go on.
Well, look at Sherlock Holmes. I mean, he's kind of the arch rationalist, and yet he, you know, has this severe addiction and goes into his own sort of ways of occult.
Now, I promised you when we were setting this up that we would have
That's
some
right. I'm here. I'm here to get my music. That's right. That's right. Yeah. And I happen to know the author of this book, not personally very well,
but this race
have
music
met him several
with,
times.
Black cultures from bebop, hip hop.
Well, I thoroughly enjoy. I've seen the notices for this book, Race Music, Black Cultures from Bebop to Hip Hop by Guthrie P. Ramsey Jr. I've had the privilege of hearing a few of his presentations at conferences, and he's a lot of fun because he's not only a scholar, and everything he backs up with scholarly research and his presentation, but he plays the piano. He plays in various modes, and he can sort of rap, go to gospel, play classical, sing blues, and discuss the different communities that he's addressing through music, or that black musicians are addressing through music, depending on, you know, obviously their context, the performance context, what and life, social existence. So I've been looking for this book and have not had a chance to read it, but I know of his work, and so I would recommend it.
Well, one of the things that's fascinating.
Sight unseen. Sorry.
One of the things that's fascinating is that people, or at least I often think of these are different categories, you know, and they stand by themselves: rap and hip hop and jazz and they do sort of, and yet they overlap because the musicians themselves often overlap.
Exactly, yeah.
And so, for example,
in fact, the creative impulse of musicians to do this.
Like, I love Aretha Franklin's music, but I didn't really understand it until I heard the recording that she did, a gospel concert in 1972 in the church back in Los Angeles where her pianist was from, and it was a real moment. Where she had some of the other gospel singers there, and her father was there, and then she sang a 9 or 10 minute version of Amazing Grace. And once I heard that performance, then I understood all the rest of it.
Transfer to the. Yeah.
Well, I understood her music differently, and once I saw her roots, then I understood
saw where she was from.
And that's what I found in talking with people about music like hip hop and rap and jazz and that it really helps to understand, you know, it extends your understanding overall to understand some of those. This next book I think is kind of fun. It has some music in it, but it's good with their hands.
Fantastic. Women boxers and Jimi Hendrix. No, that's not Jimi Hendrix. Who is that? That is, and I have to get this, Buddy Guy. Fantastic. Good with their hands. Boxers, bluesmen, and other characters from the Rust Belt.
Well, what they're looking at is you know, post-industrial American urban culture, and the people that do something with that.
He's playing it with his right hand. I should have known Jimi Hendrix played left-handed. All right. So I've been completely embarrassed on your TV show now. Embarrassed myself. But go ahead. No, I'm just joking on myself here.
But it involves class, race, gender, and music. And so this is the heavy-duty part of, I think, ethnomusicology.
When you told me in your notes that you were going to review this book, I thought of a fantastic new photography book that's come out by a man in Buffalo, New York, who's been doing photographs of people such as these folks for 30 years. He's got 3 sets of photographs set apart by 10 years. So he sees this community over growth. And he has especially couples and friends over time. It's really right down to the same it's almost a photographic ethnography. And this touches on the same kind of idea. I really enjoy this kind of approach because it's
what
sort
I
of
like when they're doing studies of real people in real time that kind of run counter to what your thing is, like the women boxing in Erie, Pennsylvania. Women's boxing is just starting to develop in a way, and there's a certain logic to it. If men can box, why not women? Right. And Muhammad Ali's daughter is a woman.
Is that right?
Yeah. So I think.
But also parallels, for instance, women being in the military. Women are being seriously injured or killed in Iraq. I mean, it's paralleling a lot of other aspects of. It's not just like something bizarre that is sort of an anomaly.
Well, another thing they're looking at is police work in New York City. I mean, that's another thing that with the World Trade Towers, in September 9/11, that we became aware that the first responders, now they call them, of the police and fire, that you have women and men with that, but also that these are people who are addressing serious needs of the society, but are not really, you don't really know them. They're like invisible or don't exist until you call 911 and you expect them to be there and you want all their help.
That's right, and they're totally there for you.
Yeah.
This is kind of a Studs Terkel of ethnography, I guess, huh?
Now this next one is much more esoteric, forms of being, cinema, aesthetics, and subjectivity. Leo Barsani and Ulysses Dutoit. And of course, the thing I kind of have a fondness for Jean-Luc Godard and the ways of her. But what they're talking about is approaching cinema as visual art, and then redefining how subjectivity, sexuality, relationality, and aesthetics can be understood.
Okay, now I put you on the spot before about relationality.
Yeah.
So, and you answered it very well. Can you repeat it for our
Well, it's
guests?
the process of how you position, how the relations are developed, and looking at that. It's the study of it. And
Godard is famous for one particular shot in a movie called Weekend, which I don't, at that time, late 60s or I guess 71, I don't know exactly when it was done, early 70s, I guess. Even to have that much film in the camera to do this shot is, a feat in itself. But it's something like an 8-minute shot. It does not stop, and you are on a weekend in France, everybody's in a traffic jam, but the tragedy, the pathos of this shot is that on one end it's extremely happy. Everybody's in a grand mood, they're going to the country. But as the camera goes forward in this traffic jam, you see that the reason for the traffic jam is this awful car accident where, and the emergency personnel are there and everything. And so you're completely transformed through the vision, but your mood at the beginning is completely changed at the end. And it's also extended because there is no cut in this shot. It just goes on. And I think that's one aesthetic that he really kind of pioneered.
Well, that's one of the things I like about Godard. He really is a visual artist.
Right.
And that the precision and the elaborateness that you have to set something like that up.
Right.
I have a different thing that I remember of a Godard cinematic moment, which is someone is in a car and got parked in front and back. And the character slams it in drive and slams the foot down the accelerator.
And keeps going back.
and then puts it in reverse and slams it backward, and then drives out very
and
peacefully.
finally finds enough, right,
and
enough
it's so
space.
hilarious because it's operating against all expectation,
Right.
all rational
All
behavior.
rationality, right.
Loses all sense of the Victorian stuff of, you know, of being worried about the consequences.
Yes,
It's just
right.
slam, bang, and out.
And out you go, right.
And that's, to me, one of the characteristics of his cinema. So, and obviously, this is a book that looks at a much more, a deeper look at
Right.
how
Right.
that works in terms of the aesthetics of it. But I've always been fascinated with that kind of, you know, informed exploration.
Right. Well, that really wraps it up. A good way to
Except we
end.
got one more.
Oh yeah, your final.
Got my final
that's
one.
right. Almost wraps it up.
And you know, I don't usually hype the producers, but in this Arboretum America Philosophy of the Forest by Diana Beresford Kroger, it's by the University of Michigan Press, and they've done a wonderful job, just absolutely superb. And along with that is the author's got a really poetic perspective when she says the world is a garden, a global garden. And from that she carries the reader with her on a celebration of the beauty we have in nature, and are concerned about taking more natural approaches to take care of our global garden. And I'm thinking, just on television the other day, they're talking about global warming and the impact on the Antarctic. I mean, you know, these ice packs,
Yes.
both north and south, are coming apart because it's getting too warm. And there's other things like the impact of all these landfills and toxic waste. And I saw another article and some scholarship on things in Asia where toxic chemicals. I saw an article on China. I mean, where these people are getting awful cases of cancer because the stuff's in their water. And so I'd love to have people starting to look at the world as Mother Earth or whatever, as more of something personal that they can identify with, rather than something that they just use and abuse and throw to the side like some Kleenex.
Right. Well, presumably this will achieve that to some degree. Certainly the Arboretum is not only a aesthetic but a philosophical kind of idea.
Well, I think people are starting to aware that it's really important to have green spaces in your living environment. In fact, in Paris now, they're redoing some of the parts of Paris in order to have more green spaces, because it isn't enough just to have
right.
You know, a very aesthetically done concrete, you know, existence.
Boston has a similar plan. There's the I think they call it the Greenway, actually. You can ride from, say, Jamaica Plain or Cambridge, one of the outer, certainly in the urban area, the metropolis of Boston, but you can get to inner city, the inner Boston town business district or the Commons or something, by bike completely without. They've made this way, the Greenway, I think they call it. I think that goes from Jamaica Plain down.
Well, here
to
in Ann
Fenway.
Arbor, they're trying to just set up a green belt.
Yes.
You know, more awareness of it.
So in the meantime, we have to really think of especially in a state like Michigan where there's so much farmland around the cities, and it's very easy to exploit.
At the same time, just a few days I drove past one of the major landfill areas where they have the pipes coming out and all the
methane
sensors
is
to measure just how toxic the stuff is.
Yeah.
And that we've been taking trash from Toronto, you know, by the you know, the super cargo trucks, the 18-wheelers. Every day they're bringing in this stuff. So it's a serious deal.
Well, we'll leave our guests with the image of green.
That's right.
And the arbor from Ann Arbor. We'll discuss the arbor.
Pleasant, the pleasant existence, and maybe that's what we can do. Well, thank you for being on Rip Rap again, and we'll have to do it. I wish we could have interviewed all these authors, but it's not always possible.
Right. Well, we'll do it again in 6 months, and hopefully, well, I know we'll have some more good choices, and there'll certainly be new themes to pick from.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Glad to be here again.